So I'm very excited to introduce Alice, Melanie, and Chaya, who are going to kick us off with a great discussion that we were supposed to have had at our 2020 conference of writing about race. So I'm going to let Alice kick it off and get us started. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jenny. And thanks for re-inviting us to come back and address this very important issue and maybe say some tough truths that people might not want to hear. But I think we're just going to try and have a candid conversation about what it's like to be a writer of color these days and the challenges that we have faced to trying to get published. Since this is kind of like a last minute thing, we're kind of going by the seat of our pants. Melanie and Chaya, are you a plotter or a pantser?
I'm a pantser for sure.
Pantser, yeah.
Excellent. So we're just going to pantser our way through this discussion. Let's just start off, I think, by giving a short bio. I'll start off. My name is Alice Stevens. I am the author of Famous Adopted People. I am also a book reviewer for the Washington Independent Review of Books. They gave me my start in publishing. I started, I think it was like 10 years ago. I don't know, before even Holly Smith joined. I was one of the original writers for YROB, and I think I've written more than 100 pieces for the website, so I'm grateful for them for giving me a platform. The YROB is just incredible in letting everybody, marginalized voices speak their truth, and if you are looking to write book reviews and think you are good enough, I strongly urge you, especially if you're a writer of color, to contact YROB and see if you can get your books reviewed, because that is really one of the areas that I think we have to work on, which is getting the word out for those smaller books that are written by marginalized voices that don't get the coverage that they really should. Okay, I think that's, I am also the editor of Bloom, which is an online magazine that is dedicated to writers who first publish at 40 and after, which I think is also another case for a lot of writers of color, because there are challenges that are in our publishing path that sort of delay publication, whereas maybe other writers can get published more quickly. Yeah, and that's it. Okay, on to you, Melanie.
So yeah, hi everyone. I'm Melanie Hatter. Let's see, I have published 2 novels and a short story collection. My recent novel is Malawi Sisters, which came out in 2019 from 4-Way Books. And yes, thank you, Alice. And had a great review with Washington Writers. I was very excited about that. My first novel, The Color of My Soul, which was published by the Washington Writers Publishing House, a small DC-based press. They are looks like someone put me on mute. Oops. The Color of My Soul was published by the Washington Writers Publishing House. That was my first published book, and that they're still a home to me. So yeah, that's it. And writing about race is something that I do, so I include that in my work. So.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. Hi, Melanie. My name is Chaya Bhuvaneswar. I am the author of White Dancing Elephants, a debut story collection, which was a finalist for a Pen American Robert Bingham Debut Fiction Award, along with like a pretty small handful of other collections published that year. And it was published by winning the Zank Story Prize, and it was featured in probably about 30 best of or most anticipated lists, including Washington Independent, Review of Books, and but also Huffington Post, Entertainment Weekly, Harper's Bazaar, Vogue, etc. And so a lot of people have asked me, how did you do that? As an indie press author, how did you get on the front page of the LA Times and all that stuff? And so I'm really looking forward today to sharing some of my perspective on how I started with a consciousness of, okay, I'm writing about race, I'm writing about sexual orientation, and I am a woman of color, and we know that fewer than 5% of books published since 1950 have been by writers of color. Stunning as that is to many white writers who sort of see us as somehow getting things that they're not, when you look at the numbers, we're actually not. So it's really interesting, and I think there's kind of a parallel situation in that there are stereotypes, for example, about Asian Americans that, there's so many Asian American doctors and there's so many of us, because I'm also a doctor. And it turns out that out of the nearly 1 million doctors in the United States, 600,000 are white men. And of the 400,000, the majority are men of other races. And when you look at how many doctors are actually Asian American women, it's on the order of 50,000 max. But that's not what we see on TV, where like you go into an ER and an Indian woman just walks in and she's just there, So I think there are analogies to be drawn for writing about race and writers of color in terms of we actually face many, many exclusionary barriers, but we are perceived as somehow being favored. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today from the standpoint of giving everyone encouragement and kind of saying it's pretty hard for everyone to get published. And we would like to share what we've learned from our journey to encourage all of you in your publishing journeys.
Yeah, thank you so much for those statistics, and for bringing that up, that people do somehow think that sometimes you're published because you, not on the merit of what you've written, but because of what you represent, and that's throughout, not just in writing, but in everything. So I just want to let's review, how did you approach publishing? Did you decide to go through an MFA? What was the venue that you decided to go through? So for me, I did not go through an MFA. I didn't want to spend the money, and I thought that I could do it myself. And I stand by that decision, but I definitely see that an MFA offers the networking possibilities that it took me 10 years to develop on my own. And also, if either of you have been through MFAs, how welcoming you found it as a person of color.
Yeah, I went through the writing program at Johns Hopkins, their evening program. It is a writing program without the F, so it's an MA. But I had been working on my first novel and had been writing and rewriting, and I finally sort of got to that point where I felt like I needed more structure, I needed more guidance, and that was what made me decide that it was time to go back to school. And Hopkins was a local program that I could participate in and work around my day job and all that good stuff. So it was a great experience. It was a very not very diverse experience. I was often the only person of color, certainly Black person in the room, but I, I embraced the learning that I could get from it, and ultimately ended up publishing. My thesis was my first novel, and then ultimately it got published. So I had that opportunity, but it's tough. I mean, you sit in a room with, all white faces. And I distinctly remember being in a workshop experience where I was writing about one of my characters who was Black blushed and her cheeks went red. And this woman in the group argued with me that Black people, you don't see their skin turn red. And I'm sitting there looking at her like, wait, which one of us is the one who's the person of color here who would know? So there's those kinds of experiences that I think often happens, when you are in an environment that is predominantly white and you're a person of color, and you have to kind of battle that a little bit, because instead of talking about the craft of writing, you end up getting into these conversations around race and what race means. And it's like, yes, that's important, but right now I'm trying to learn how to write and craft, and that's what I want to focus on. So it definitely created some challenging moments for me. But at the same time, I stepped back and said, you know what, I'm here to learn the craft, and I'm going to learn the craft one way or the other. And I got through it, and yeah, so here I am today. How about you, Chaya?
These are such important stories, I think. I'm so grateful, both of you are sharing them. So I feel like I had an interesting path in that I think I was very ambivalent about, going to professional school, in that I felt like I needed to support my family, including my younger brother, who has a disability. And so I really thought had to be responsible in a particular way, but I kept trying to figure out how to make spaces for writing and writing community. And I got into the Hopkins program, actually, but without full funding. And then I got full funding to do a master's in South Asian studies with a focus on writing at UPenn. And I got through that to teach writing at Kelly Writers House, and teach a course which I was kind of quaintly titled by someone else, not me, Writing the Indian American Experience, which really makes me laugh now because it's hardly that there's only one, and there's so many problems with it, but it was really fun. It was like 50 people, not all of whom were South Asian, which was even more interesting. Like there were biracial students, there were white students, and Black students who had South Asian relatives, and so that was really cool. And so I think that was good. And I feel like it sort of kept me flexible. I don't know, like I felt like instinctively I wanted one step of distance from professionalized writing, because I took a lot of writing classes as an undergrad at Yale, and they had a really strong creative writing program. But I felt, as you did, Melanie, that there were many instances where I just didn't feel like what people had to say was that relevant to me. And it was a constant effort to kind of keep the conversation. Like I would want to say, but do you think this character, what she does convincing to you? Like I wanted the emotional connection with my classmates, and they would be stuck on, I just think there are too many Indian names in this story. Or like,
Yeah.
Or just like, I don't know, like these discussions about whether or not a kind of food should be italicized or not. I'd be like, well, sure, whatever you like. I didn't care at all. And they were like, no, it's political. I was like, no, I really don't care. But so I think the struggle to keep the focus on what is truly relevant to you as a developing artist, I actually think that's a universal struggle. It's there whether you're a writer of color, and it's there if you're a white writer, it's there if you're an older writer with a bunch of 19-year-olds, it's there if you're a 19-year-old with a bunch of older writers. Like it's really, it has so much to do with what John Gardner points out in The Art of Fiction, when he talks about plot and Shakespeare, where he sort of says all these subplots in Hamlet that Shakespeare could have gone off on, but suddenly he knows how to yank you back, and I think that's true. And that's also something I struggle with in longer works, how to avoid getting drawn away from what is at the center. So I think like as you navigate these questions of identity, whether it's race for you or not, I think just keeping in mind that it's hard for everyone to get published, and that the certainty that professional writers, people who have done MFAs have, it's very thin, and it doesn't translate into getting a book deal. And I've had a lot of colleagues who did all that and didn't get published, or didn't publish well. So I think just remembering it's hard for everyone can hopefully empower you to just keep the focus on what you think will actually nurture you as a writer.
Yeah, that's such good advice, and it's true. It's hard for everybody. I mean, there are those fantasy stories, that you hear about, where the young 29-year-old writer gets the big huge deal, and but that is that's the 0.0001%. That's like being the Bill Gates of writers. It's just not going to happen for most of us. But it's interesting what you said, about the comments that you face from your MFA program writing mates, because a lot of them will then go on to be the agents and the editors and the gatekeepers that then will carry those same concerns of whether a Black person can blush, or whether there are too many Indian names in a novel or in a story to be entertaining for Western readers. And then those attitudes come back to you when you submit to an agent, when you submit to a literary magazine, to a publishing house. I'm sure that we can all trade horror stories of some of the rejections that we've gotten that are so nakedly racist that it's just like, whoa, I can't believe you just put that in writing. And I write from the point of view not only as of an Asian American, but also as an adopted person, which is its own very niche writing group. And there are a lot of popular misconceptions about adoption that people hold very dear and do not want to let go of. And trying to write against that popular narrative, it's really like trying to swim upstream. And some of the editors that I have been submitted to say things like, oh, I published an adoption novel 3 years ago and it didn't do well, so sorry. Or else, I prefer the adoption novel I published 5 years ago to your adoption novel. And you're like, well, would they say that about a World War II novel? No way. They publish World War II novels every day of the week. So it's just those kind of attitudes that you then face within the gatekeeping establishment. If either of you can talk to that. And I'm sure
I think you're right. I've heard, and I will say that 2020 certainly changed things, I think, a little bit for Black writers, for sure. But I think even, the trans community, publishing is being a little more open to some of those, marginalized groups. Sort of having sort of their eyes open to the fact that there is so much societal, push down against, people of color in just about every industry. And I have seen, I'm still trying to find an agent, and I've gone through many rounds of trying to find agents with a variety of different projects, and I'm definitely now seeing more Black agents than I've ever seen before. So I'm very encouraged to see that, that sort of diversity is really starting to take hold, and hopefully will continue on. But but as Chaya says, it is just, it's hard to get published, period. But I think, there certainly was a time when an agent would have their Black project, or maybe their Asian project or whatever, and they would sort of check that off for the year. And so anyone else coming back, behind that, submitting, they'd sort of be like, well, we're good. I did my, bit for the year, and maybe next year I'll look again. But I'm hoping that has changed, that, we're not seeing that anymore, that people are still, as open or more open to seeing a variety of voices. One of the things, though, that I, especially with my novel, Malawi Sisters, I had a number of agents come back to me saying, this is a great story, but I can't relate to the characters, or I can't quite relate to the voice, and it was so frustrating, because it's like, well, on the one hand you're saying it's good, but then on the other you're saying you can't relate. Like, what does that even really mean? Have you experienced that, either Chaya or Alice?
Are we good for time, or are we? I see this message about time. Do we have time to answer that? Or
Yeah, we're good. We have until 11:15 is my understanding.
Oh, okay, great.
So we got
Okay,
tons
yeah.
of time.
Because I just keep seeing this message saying time's up, and I don't understand.
They're
it.
talking to people who are pitching. There are people who are pitching
It's
agents
constant.
right now.
I'm like, hint. I can take a hint, but but no, I think this question of gatekeeping, it's really important. It's an important topic, and I think we should bring it out into the front of part of what this talk is about, because there are quite a few things to say about it. I think this year was really landmark in terms of the American Dirt controversy, for example, for Flatiron Books. And so if any of you have not been following that, this author who, I'm sure in her own mind thought she was writing this splendid book, although apparently lifted parts of it from Latin American authors who had already published on border crossing, which is, to me, that's the really disturbing aspect of it, that the near plagiarism aspects of it should have, I think, evoked a much stronger response than it did, because that's not okay. To just kind of say, I want to publish a white author writing about the border, but also a white author who went and read all these books by Latin American and Mexican authors and lifted parts of them. So that's really, I don't know what that was about, but they're certainly not proud of that. And they have taken a lot of measures in its aftermath to promote authors of color, specifically Latinx authors, bringing on a Latinx editor at large, and really and meeting with a group of Latinx writers who kind of confronted them about what exactly they objected to, in how they were using the very few available slots for writers of color to publish a book like that, which did things like have a launch party where people had nail polish and ornaments with images of barbed wire fences and detained people, and detained children. So that was, I mean, that was really disturbing on many levels, the whole American Dirt thing. Reams have been written about it. But you know, the tricky thing is it was a bestseller. So what is then the lesson that industry is going to learn from that? You know, it's really hard. I mean, so there's that aspect of gatekeeping, where gatekeeping is actually doing some things that are objectionable, perhaps. But then there's also, you know, Simon and Schuster's employees repeatedly staging walkouts, objecting to, for example, the publication of one of Breonna Taylor's murderers. I mean, someone who actually shot this young woman in cold blood, who wasn't doing something wrong. And all these publishing employees really rose up and said, we don't want you to publish this person's voice and this person's perspective. We think this is, you know, really morally indefensible. And publishing listened and actually withdrew. Simon and Schuster withdrew from publishing that. So I do think there's a big change. There's something called Publishing Paid Me, which is a hashtag on Twitter that revealed that, you know, even national, like Jesmyn Ward, a Black woman author who won the National Book Award twice, was paid less of an advance than some pretty random white authors, some of whose books did well, but some of whose books really sunk like a stone. And that's the thing. There's no sort of golden story that's uncomplicated in publishing, because there's a high cost of not earning out a big advance, where the publisher gave the person a lot of money up front, but then the book didn't sell. And so it then becomes much harder to sell the person's second book. And there are all these issues, even in what seems like the fantasy or whatever. So I definitely recommend not engaging much with the fantasy and just really focusing on writing the book you want to write. But I do think it's been an important year for some of these changes and some of these truths to come forward. And I think optimistically, we can say that we actually don't know what the impact long-term on publishing is going to be. But that said, this year, many of my friends who went out on submission got book deals, and some had been struggling for book deals for many years. So I think there's a reckoning by publishers that they're going to be held accountable in some way, but not clear how much or for how long. So because all that shifts, again, it's really sustaining to try to build a community, if you can, of people who will support what you're trying to do as a writer. I guess I keep coming back to that point, but I can't emphasize it enough.
Yeah, I think you're right, that it's very important for us to find other writers who can support us, specifically as people who are writing against the current mainstream narrative, because it just helps so much to know that you're not the only one. And also because we trade tips and we can tell each other, you know, things that are going on, and just help each other, give each other a hand. And we could have a whole discussion on American Dirt. You know, that was what a subject. And I think an important thing is that they gave that book $1 million marketing fund. And that's just telling you the establishment was 100% behind this book. They thought it was going to be the great American immigration novel, even though it wasn't written by an immigrant. That was how they marketed it. And it was also interesting that a lot of celebrities, a lot of famous writers and celebrities who are people of color jumped on the bandwagon, and they said, you know, this is a great book too. And so I think it really just shows you the power of the elite level of publishing, and that they are out of touch. But I do think that they are trying to reconcile that a little bit. there was a Black woman who was recently named one of the top editors of one of the big four. And, you know, so they're trying to make changes, but I just feel like the establishment is so well entrenched, and that we are so polarized now, you know, that even something like not publishing 6 very minimal Dr. Seuss books that nobody ever read before, except for maybe the one about Mulberry Street, which I read as a child, and you know, that which had the very racist imagery of a Chinaman running down the street. You know, people just, that just blew people's minds, and they couldn't deal with it. And there's that whole problem within publishing is the two kind of forces of people who want to kind of go beyond the sad old past, and people who are stuck in the sad old past. And it's kind of interesting to watch that play out. But I do want to get to Chaya. You said that you hinted at how you promoted your book. And I think that would be really important for all of us to know how you got on so many of those lists, and just what you did. Do you have a publicist? You said you had an agent. Neither Melanie nor I have an agent, which is a whole other matter too. So anyway, I just would like to hear kind of how you went about that.
Sure, you know, and I apologize, I got a little distracted because there's like a side chat kind of challenging the plagiarism literature about American Dirt. And I just want to be really clear that there are many different forms of plagiarism. And so there's one form where people actually take passages of a book and put them unaltered into their own book. And there was an accusation that someone had done that of a young adult book a couple of years ago with one of Meg Cabot's books, you know, from the Princess Diaries or something. And so that's really clear, and often those publishing book deals do get canceled. But then there are other forms of plagiarism and appropriation where people actually take scenes from someone's book. So what the Janine Cummins did is she took a nonfiction book written by Luis Alberto Urrea, based on his field work and humanitarian work at the border as a Latinx man. And so both inside and outside to that experience, because he wasn't a refugee. And she took the research he had done and put it in her book in a very unaltered as well as unacknowledged fashion. Like, you'll see lots of books acknowledge the books that they read when they did research, but it's very delicate to not present sort of someone else's work as your own invented and imagined story. And so that's the kind of plagiarism that they're pretty National Public Radio, Huffington Post, but also Texas Monthly, you know, many news outlets looked at this closely. So I just want to be clear about that, because it's certainly not it's certainly not a charge that I make lightly. And there's someone on the chat who sort of is continuing to engage me in this. And so I think actually I'm going to turn over the discussion back to Melanie and Alice, because I don't really, in principle, I don't continue that sort of engagement. You know, that is I see that as a form of aggression. And just as a woman of color, I don't engage once it continues beyond that point, but I'm happy to listen and support my colleagues on the panel.
Yeah, I think it's important that once you make an assertion, the other person has to investigate it, and it's not your job to explain over and over again. And that is something that we find that we are having to do a lot these days with so many subjects. People are demanding that we explain what they can't understand when it's really up to them to do the investigation and
Right.
to,
Right.
you
I
know.
mean, just to be really clear, the perception of racism by people of color, it is not a charge that we need to substantiate. That is not what racism is. Racism is a historic experience grounded in objective facts like immigration legislation, ranging from Jim Crow to the Chinese Exclusion Act to various immigration quotas, to barriers to citizenship for certain communities of color, to housing policies, to business practices. It is an entity that exists within American history. It is not something that any of us are bearing the responsibility to prove is real or to prove exists. And when we point it out, we are speaking from our experience, and people can get something from this and connect with us or not. And that is your choice as a reader or listener. But to continue to ask us to somehow defend that statement is actually a form of aggression against us as people of color. And it is something that I refuse to engage in.
Thank you, Chaya. Sort of switching a little bit. I don't want this to get lost. James Randolph had asked a question here. What responsibility, if any, do you feel the author has to guard against agents or publishers selling their book in a way that feels disingenuous? Any firsthand experience from the writers? Alice or Chaya, do you have any thoughts on that?
I can't say that I was asked to market my book in a way that was that made me uncomfortable. I published with Unnamed Press, which is a small indie press that that has a very good reputation, that has treated me very well with respect, understood what my message was, understood what I was trying to do. Just to tell you quickly, my publication story and the importance of persistence. I had an agent through Writer's House, really good agent. She submitted my manuscript multiple times over multiple years. I asked her to submit to Unnamed Press, and she said, "No, Alice," and she sent me a spreadsheet of all the people she'd submitted to. 61, actually, no, it was probably more. She submitted probably to 41 agents, which, 41 editors, which for an agent is like incredible. She went above and beyond. And she said, "Look, I couldn't sell it. I'm sorry, I'm done." And so I said, "Okay, well, I'm just going to submit this myself to Unnamed because they took unagented submissions." And I said, if it does not get published, that's it. I'm putting it in the drawer and I'll start something else. And, hallelujah, it was a miracle. They picked up my book and they published it. But it just goes to show you that you have to be persistent. You can't give up. You're going to have a lot of challenges. But if you believe in yourself, and that is the most important thing, then just keep on going, and hopefully you will prevail someday. It took me 10 years. So
yeah, indeed. I just want to share, I had, this is a book that I've been writing for eons, that I am trying to get published. And I had submitted it to an agent who came back and said she really liked it, but had some changes. And she sort of gave me some ideas and suggestions, and some of the suggestions she made I thought were good, but there was sort of this big aspect of really kind of changing the direction of the story that I thought didn't work for me. It wasn't the story that I was really writing. But she said, think about it, and I'd love to see a rewrite. So I thought about it, but it what she was suggesting just wasn't right for me. So I incorporated some of the things that I thought, would work, and did another rewrite. I must have done like 1 million rewrites on this manuscript, and submitted it back to her. And she ultimately was like, no, it doesn't work. But I sort of felt like she's not going to accept it because I didn't rewrite it the way she wanted it to. And I think, to your point, Alice, you have to stick with the vision that you have for the work. You definitely want to get feedback from people, and you definitely want to, rework something to make it better, but you can't rewrite something to fit someone else's vision. You have to, stay with what it is that you and this book may never ever get published, or I may end up having to do it myself. I don't know, but fingers crossed. But I feel strongly enough that I'm going to stick with the story that I originally came up with. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Well, I guess I'm hoping I have some constructive advice, not only from my own experience, but from a good friend's. So I'm going to talk about my friend's experience a little bit, and then I'm going to talk about mine. So my friend Anjali Anjeti is a member of the National Book Critics Circle and an organizer in Georgia for, They See Blue, and had been trying many years to get published and get an agent, and had kind of yeses where it didn't connect when they tried to submit to editors. And she's written about this in a really interesting article in The Atlantic, which I will share in the chat after I'm done. And then, as some of you may know, this year she had 2 books come out, both with indie presses, one with Hub City in the South and one with the University of Georgia, a book of essays and a novel, respectively. And she was just on Morning Edition last week, and her novel sold out at Amazon and did amazing. I mean, is really doing amazing. And I think it's a level of success that she certainly didn't anticipate when she was sort of going through this struggle of trying to get through these gatekeepers. But a couple of things that she did really stand out for us to learn from, collectively. One is that she kept writing different books. I think there is really something to be said from a mental health standpoint, as well as your development as an artist, in rather than only thinking one novel or one book is your route into publishing. Think broadly, do your best on your passion project, but try to expand your passions and think of what other things you could write. I think the novel she published ended up being like her 4th or 5th novel that she wrote. And the essay collection came out of thinking broadly about herself as a writer and starting to do a lot of freelance essays and nonfiction, and then kind of building, sorry to use this word, a platform, so that once she did publish, I think there were a lot of people who were eager to hear from her, especially because of the national attention that the election in Georgia had, and Stacey Abrams and so on. So I think that's like a neat story to learn from, in terms of resisting the model where you write this one thing and you just try 1 million times to get it published, and you can't, and then you kind of interpret from that, oh, I'm not going to get published. I think there's a passivity that a lot of writers take on of like, choose me, but it's not really how it works. You keep trying, but you keep trying with multiple projects, multiple genres. If you wrote a literary fiction novel for adults that for years hasn't seen traction, try writing an essay or 2 and getting it published, or try writing a young adult novel chapter and see how it goes. Just keep trying, but don't necessarily just try one way, because it may not be like that. So one of my agent's clients is Britt Bennett, the writer of The Vanishing Half. And interestingly, she published an essay and sort of thought, and it went viral on Jezebel, and people thought that her first book would be a book of essays or a memoir, but she actually finished a novel first, and the agent was willing to go out with that. And so I think don't underestimate how much agents just want to sell something. And if you give them something to sell, that may build a relationship enough so that you get the time you may need to develop your sort of first choice, this novel you really want to publish or whatever. So that's one piece of advice. And I see in the chat, people are asking me for my friend's name and the novel titles. But as I said, I'm going to put it in the chat after I finish talking. And then I'll just speak briefly about my own experience. So I queried agents in October 2020, which was like almost 2 years after I published my story collection. But I waited a while until I really felt that my book was as strong as I could get it. And I had 11 offers of representation, mostly from white agents, but some agents of color. And I went with the agent who I felt had the least complicated liking for me and my writing. And I think that's the one piece of advice I would pass on, that usually you cannot convince an agent to believe in you. You cannot convince an agent to like your writing. Either they just really like it or they don't. And the reason they like it, they may not even be able to explain to you. And that's where race really enters in, because on one level, there could be racism in someone saying, I can't relate to your characters. But on the other hand, they're being honest, that they themselves cannot necessarily articulate or analyze why they fall in love with a project or why they don't. And so I think, given that you have limited time, you want to get published, you don't want to be all snagged up with wondering what your agent really thinks of you or how you can please your agent, I would strongly encourage you to hold out for someone who's just unabashedly enthusiastic about you. Just really enthusiastic, not conditional, like, well, if you do this, then I'll like you. No, just I think it's really important, because like the pool of agents expands and changes all the time. Like there are new agents literally every day. To be an agent, you don't need any degree, you don't need any training, you don't need any experience. You just, you just try. You just have to like books, and you pick a book that you like, and you literally get an email of an editor, and you develop a pitch letter, and you send a book to an editor, and bam, you're an agent, And so given that, you don't have to invest that much in this constantly changing cast of gatekeeper characters in publishing. At the end of the day, who really cares? Because there are famous agents, like my friend Esme Wagen Wong, who had a bestseller in the collected Schizophrenias not long ago. Before that, could not sell her novel to like 30 people that her high-powered agent at the Wiley agency submitted to. And she submitted it to an indie press, and then she became really acclaimed for that book. But the fact that she had a high-powered agent didn't do anything to help her publish that book. So all it did is help her get more money for the next one. So just try to let go of this idea of I have to do this, and then I have to do this, and then I have to do this, because there's so few have to's in publishing. Just do it any way that you can, and just try to get published in any medium that you can, because it'll certainly help you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. It's a long, circuitous route, and we all have our, just like life, we all have our own way of getting there. And you got to do what's best for you. Not all of us have the ability to choose among 11 agents, Chaya, but that we could dream about that. But it's really good advice, is that you just got to keep on keeping on. My first two manuscript that I didn't sell was a historical novel. I have another historical novel that I want to sell. They're, you know, I think they're perfectly publishable, but I can't get anybody interested in them for the, you know, the very reason that people say I can't relate to it. So I kind of went, when I couldn't sell my historical novel, I went to the personal. I went to, you know, Write What You Know, which for me was adoption. Adoption is not a subject that is very explored in, honestly explored. So that's how I actually got published, not through my historical novels, but through writing more personally. And you know, here's a quick notion to throw out. It seems like people, the gatekeepers today, want colors of writers to be writing cutting edge stuff. They don't want them to write. They're not interested in the more traditional sort of historical novels or that sort of thing. They're looking for writers of color who are going to break barriers. Do you think that's true or not?
That, yeah, probably. Yeah, that certainly makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
I don't know.
you know,
I don't think so. I'm sorry, Melanie. I'm not meaning to contradict you, because Melanie and I met at the Sewanee Writers Conference and are actually BFFs. But no, I don't think any rules like that apply. I mean, it's really imperative that you write what you want to and really believe in, because I do think there is a sense of inauthenticity that creeps in when people try to write for the market. I think it's just such a mistake. I think you should just write what interests you enough to stay really engaged in a project, and, you know, don't worry about its marketability or not, because for every genre there's an exception. There's a beautiful, for example, there's a beautiful YA novel by a queer Latinx writer. Aristotle and Dante discovered the secrets of the universe, you know, about this coming of age novel, but it's a historical novel and it's based in the 80s. And the rule in YA is teens don't want to read historical novels, but that novel blew up, you know, it was huge. So it just doesn't, I mean, if you care about the market at all, I guess it'll already be hardwired into what you choose to write about. Like, it's more instinctive, you know, like if you're someone who can't stand to watch an art house movie and you have to watch an action movie every time you watch a movie, probably you're not going to write Remains of the Day, you know, like probably you're going to write something that is like what you love. But don't stray from doing actually what you want, because it just doesn't work the other way. That's my 2 cents.
well, I do agree with you, Chaya, that as writers, I think we need to be writing what moves us. But I do think that literary agents are looking for that breakout novel, you know, or, you know, book that's going to kind of put either them on the map or, you know, bring them in money. I mean, at the end of the day, they're looking to sell to make money. And I think as they're selecting books, they're looking at that. They're thinking about, is this something that's going to break out? Is this something that is going to, you know, hit the bestseller list? I think that they are motivated in that way. Maybe not all of them, because you do have some of the agents who, you know, just fall in love with the writing, and they're going to then, you know, submit it to, you know, whoever they think might be able to, you know, but again, at the end of the day, they want someone who's going to purchase it, right? Money is, you know, money is the bottom line. But you know, what I would say for folks too is that one of the strategies that I have is that, you know, ultimately I would love to have an agent. And the reason for that is, you know, that broader reach, to readers, right? You have an agent, they're usually able to get you a contract that then, gets you, further afield. If I can't get the agent, then my next level is the independent presses. And the independent presses are doing some amazing work, stuff that a literary agent might think is, yeah, this is great, this is good, which, trust me, I've got a whole host of letters from literary agents saying, I love your writing, but I can't sell it. So the independent presses are the ones that are really, I think, doing a lot more cutting edge publishing than the big houses are. So if you are trying to get published, really look at the independent houses, because they're doing some amazing work. And I think they're a lot less interested in trying to make the big bucks and really more interested in getting out good work. And then, your next level from that is the self-publishing route. I self-published my short story collection, but I will warn you, it's a lot of work trying to market your book, and it's a lot of work. And I think we've got a little bit more time, but I would now slide it back to Chaya to talk about that aspect of how she was able to get her book, massively marketed.
Well, I think I think hopefully there's a way I can extrapolate from that that's useful, but I'm hesitant because, number one, I'm glad I wasn't thinking about that when I was actually writing it and revising it. So I think that's important, to keep the marketing really out of your mind when you're trying to write and finish a project. And I've actually had a couple of conversations with my agent about this, where she says, yes, these are going to be commercial entities, but for the magic to happen, that can't be part of you, and that's the paradox of any kind of art, right? That we do want it to sell, but that it's just not, it's not a straight line between what we write and that desire, if that makes sense. So basically what I did is I did a publicity consultation for 1 hour with a really prominent and renowned publicist of color, Kima Jones, who some of you might have read about, and who actually just became an agent at Triangle Literary this week, and is a writer herself and very talented. And so I did this consultation with her to try to understand how a previous book, Insurrections by Rian Amilcar Scott, had similarly broken through and gotten a lot of publicity, a lot of attention, even though he also published with an indie press. And what she really talked about was just being proactive about making sure the book was mailed out in time. Like, basically, she said it's really about timeliness, because if you don't have galleys at least, I think it's like 8 or 9 months before publications, it's really hard for the big journals like Publishers Weekly, Kirkus, Library Journal, Book List to consider running a review of your book. And without that review, it's very hard in turn for booksellers to know about your book. So really the biggest thing I took away from her consultation was just to be very rigorous about having advance notice and having time. And she basically said, really try to do those mailings 8 or 9 months ahead of the pub date, and then 6 months ahead of the pub date, start writing letters of outreach to various book reviewers and try to send them copies of your book. And it's challenging because with an indie press, they print very few hard copies as galleys, as pre-publication bound versions of your book. And so I ended up using a PDF of the book. And so I think that's really all I did. I just, made sure that the book was sent out to ever increasing lists of places where it might be covered. And then the reviewers made the independent decision to cover it. But I think a lot of indie presses books never reach that point because the indie press cannot keep track of those deadlines, and it cannot afford the mailing costs or the printing costs of making those pre-publication versions of the book. And so if you pay attention to those, the deadlines, the mailings, and pre-publication versions, you should be fine.
You make it sound so simple. But yeah, that's good advice. My book, which was actually published by Esme Wang's publisher as well, Unnamed Press, they published her first novel that you talked about, which is so good. What is it called? The Border of Paradise, I think it's called. Incredibly good book. I was signed in January, and my book came out in October. So immediately I was at kind of like that disadvantage where I couldn't make that outreach to everybody. And that is where an agent is so important, and I didn't have the agent. And I just listened to a talk by Jessica Williams, who's the editor at William Morrow, and she said, you know, the agent is so important because they're like your lawyer. And it's true. I mean, I feel like I could be taken advantage of by my publishing firm, which I love, but you know, they could be ripping me off. I have no idea. So an agent is very important, but they're also very elusive. But I've already had 2 agents, so you can too. And I think we're kind of at the end of our time. Do we have time for questions? I didn't see if there were any questions. I'm very bad at keeping track of the chat, but
Yeah, actually, Melanie has been hopping in there and answering some of the things.
Oh, good, Melanie.
Yeah, I do apologize. I wasn't able to share the document with you that I was threatening that I was going to. So, yeah, so let me see if we can find, for example, Judy was asking how important is social media presence website in the process? And again, Melanie was saying, yes, agents definitely like to see that platform. So I don't know if you guys want to talk a little bit about that social media and what it has meant to you, even after publication. I mean, that's often where it really kicks into high overdrive.
Yeah, I think agents definitely look at your platform. They're very, very interested in that. They want to know how many followers you have, and you know how big a part you already have in the national discourse. So it's important to get out there and start building that. They want to see that you've published elsewhere. Chaya said, you know, publish those essays, write those essays. I say write those book reviews. You know, you want to start building up a publication record before you even approach the agents to show them, you know, that you've been out there, that you've been able to be published, and that you're building up a loyal readership. I can't say that I'm very successful on social media, but I get out there all the time, and I plug myself, and I do know there are returns. I hear from people. It's really nice to hear from people, especially when you've just gotten a rejection and somebody says, oh, I just read your book, it means so much to me. So just having that sort of back and forth conversation with people who you wouldn't necessarily be in touch with over social media, I think is very important. Social media also has its downsides in that you can be harassed or get into arguments with people, but you know, we all know that anyway from day-to-day life. What would you say, Melanie?
Yeah, I actually completely lost my thought. I had something that I was thinking and it just disappeared. I apologize.
This is when telepathy would really come in handy. Well,
Yeah.
I guess on platform, there are a couple things I would say. I think it's really the people who, when I was thinking about how to promote my book, again, from the standpoint of, oh, wow, I'm publishing with an indie press, how can I do this? I think I read a book or two, or really like an article, like, I think there's a woman, Fauzia Burke. I'll look up her name and the spelling and put it in the chat. And she's written stuff about book publicity and blah, blah, blah. And I guess I just have 3 warnings. Okay, one is writing is a formless type of work in a lot of ways, especially when you are either starting a book or you have a book and you don't know how to revise it to get other people to love it as much as you do, or to get it to be clear. And so there's a lot of formlessness and uncertainty. And I think for some people, the book business becomes a way to fill that uncertainty and to kind of fill that void. And they start becoming super expert on this thing and that thing and this person they know and networking. And they put all this jargon into it, of, gosh, I don't know, like pitch making and I don't know, like all kinds of stuff. And I just think ultimately that doesn't serve you, because just remember, we are the ones creating the thing that other people want to sell. And when we get involved in marketing, I don't think it should go beyond the point of we are connecting with people who can help sell the book. So for me, what it meant was, for example, my publisher wasn't able to set up a book tour. They could sort of cooperate with me if I identified places I could go or had, friends and family to stay and attend the reading. And so I had to take the lead in that. And so that's a way where, by making a personal connection with booksellers and putting the book in their hands, and then the ones who really liked it contacted me and said, we want you to come here and read for us. They became champions of the book, like indie booksellers became champions of my book. And so I think that's constructive, because there it's not all jargony. It's just like a human connection that they picked your book out of this pile to read because you connected with them. But then if they hadn't liked your book, it would be useless. Like if they didn't think your book was actually good, all of that marketing stuff, it's just useless. Like it's not going to help you at all. Nobody cares, I mean, okay, a few people, like if you're a celebrity and, I guess like Chrissy Teigen can write whatever she wants, that's fine, because only a small fraction of her millions of followers have to actually buy whatever she writes. So, but for most people, they just care about the book itself. And so I would really caution against trying to become a marketing expert. It's more a sense of trying to identify things that big 5 publishers do to support books, which is really, they just mail a shit ton of copies out to places that could review the book, but they can't get us to review the book. I review books for the Washington Post, and I get pitches all the time. Can you review this book? Can you review this book? And I say no, because I didn't like that book, or I'm not that interested in that book. So for all their money, big 5 cannot market books like against people's will. So just something to think about, like just don't get too involved in the marketing, but once your book is in a publisher's hands, don't give it over to them. Try to get involved in making sure they do the best they can for your book.
Good advice. Did we have any other questions?
There is an interesting question here. Where was it? Yeah, in today's, Jacob Dorman, in today's trade publishing world, are there any circumstances in which a white author can write stories featuring people of color, whether historical, general, nonfiction, or fiction, And if so, is the market for such books diminished due to the difficulty of marketing such books? I think there are certainly have been a lot of white writers who are writing about Black people, Black topics. I think that happens a lot. I don't know if it's been diminished. I think maybe people are being more aware of it and perhaps being a little more cautious about it. I will say that the Washington Writers Publishing House, was it last year? I don't know, I'm confused by the years, but the last short story collection that they published was The Rest of the World, which was written by Adam Schwartz. And he's a white writer who, he is a teacher in the Baltimore school system. And a lot of the stories that he wrote were from the perspective of young Black students. I thought he did an amazing job with those stories. They were authentic, the voices were real. It was a world that he knew. And I don't think, I've never felt that you have to be, a particular race to write a particular story. But I think you do have to be cognizant of all the nuances. You can't, we talked a little bit about American Dirt. You can't just write a story from the surface. You have to understand the culture. You have to understand the language, the nuances within cultures, the dynamics, to be able to really write the story effectively. And I think that that's often the criticism, is not so much, well, a white person, wrote a story about a Black person. The criticism is, was it authentic? Did they really understand the story to be able to write it effectively? And I think that that ultimately is the bottom line. The other part of it, of course, is that the frustration, I think, for people of color is that those stories about people of color that are written by white people get seen oftentimes before our stories do. And that is where the frustration lies, because we are here, we are writing those stories, we are writing, a myriad of perspectives, but you get someone who is perhaps in a particular circle, they have some connections that I might not, or Alice might not, or Chaya, and they're able to get their story in front of one of the big publishing houses, or big agent. And those are the kinds of things that I think are frustrating. I'm hoping that that's changing now, but I guess time will tell. Anyone else have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you said it really well. I agree largely with what you've said. That don't be afraid to write another race. Just don't do it with knowing what your intention is. Don't use the other race as a prop. You want to inhabit that character like you'd inhabit any other character. And so you want to understand why you're writing somebody of another race, and is that necessary? And can you do it can you do it honestly, and not by not treating them as a trope or a prop? I mean, think about if the only Black character or Asian character in your book is the one in jail, or the one who's begging for money, or the one who's robbing you, then maybe you don't want to do that. It's just common sense, and think about it. And I feel badly for a lot of my white colleagues who are very scared about writing other races. And in a way I can understand that, but really it's just up to you to write it honestly and to write it well, and that's it. It's not really an insurmountable thing. They're a character just like any other character in your book, and you have to treat them with total respect. Any thoughts, Chaya?
No, I think you and Melanie covered that topic really well.
Well, ladies, I think we're sort of reaching our time on this. This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I just want to mention that Fauzia Burke was one of our panelists at last week's one of last week's sessions, all about one, we were talking about how you sell your book, and two, the ways that you can get published without an agent, even though everybody today is trying to get an agent. Anyway, I thank you so much for you all joining us today. This has been a fascinating conversation. I think a lot of people got a lot out of it, certainly seeing from the chat sessions. So thank you so much. And we will catch you at the 2022 conference. Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jenny.